This is Designing the Revolution series. You're listening to Chapter 14, Part 2, Framing, Communication and Media. In the last episode, talk, I ended it on a little bit of a theoretical note. So I'm mixing up the theory and practice here a bit. And what I was suggesting, my provocation, my theoretical provocation, as you might say, is that the truth is quite problematic and not necessarily some simple binary matter. So I was saying that when you're in the interview and you're saying something that's not factually absolutely correct, it doesn't actually matter, because what matters is the broader communication of the interview, the authenticity of your rage and horror about what's happening. That's what you're communicating. That's the truth, not the minutiae of whether something is, a little bit this way or a little bit that way, rather than what you said. And then I juxtapose this to sort of undermine the critique of what I've just been said by rationalists, and said when the rationalist, in inverted commas, says a fact, they are not saying a fact and a truth in an unproblematic way, because the fact is a reductive description of reality. And of course, what you need to do is give a sort of ecology of facts in order for that fact to be more salient, as you might say, more real. And then, of course, these facts are produced through an ideological social context, i.e., a particular epistemological theory of risk, how you describe risk and what have you, which is highly political and has been politicised by the IPCC. So if you haven't seen that episode, go and look at it. But obviously this is quite challenging, but it's central to our ongoing discussions in this series. And we need nuance here, because we're not saying there aren't facts, there's not a reality out there. We're just saying that we need to be acutely aware of how the reformist space perverts and distorts a deeper sense of reality and a deeper sense of truth. And we have to design responses to that, such as the ones that I described in the last episode. So before we get on to longer term talks on the right-wing space, I just want to introduce a sort of parallel and similar argument about the nature of emotional communication. So the sort of rationalist middle class, enlightenment space, as we've identified, has got this phobia about emotion, the showing of emotion. And that's a sort of proxy criticism for the notion of expressing negativity. I hate you, you're a twat, fuck you, all this sort of thing, right? It's like, no, we can't do that. And obviously they've got a point, right, which I'll come on to in a minute. And in traditional nonviolence theory, as it were, which is to a certain extent part of that rationalist culture of polite conversation, as you might say, to my mind, over the last 30 years, and we'll be developing this in future episodes, so I'm always saying that, aren't I? To my mind, there's been a reconstruction of what nonviolent communication actually means, which is more psychologically robust. And what I mean by that is that the engagement in communicative aggression is arguably not violent. So, for instance, let me concretize this with the example of Larry Kramer. So Larry Kramer was, in my opinion, the most successful and innovative campaigner in the 20th century, even more than Gandhi and Martin Luther King, in a certain way, right? I'm not going to, push it necessarily. But that's on most days my opinion. And the reason for this is because you can see a certain authenticity and emotionality that was post mid-20th century repression. What I mean by that is, if you can look at this on YouTube. If you look at a film called Love and Anger, I think that's what it's called. He stands up in a university, stands up in a hospital consultation, official professional space. And he just swears his head off and says, no one fucking knows what to do. And it's totally disgusting and I'm totally fucked off. And he's shaking and he's authentic and he's real, right? And I would argue he's full of love, right? Because he intensely wants to stop his friends and people in the gay community dropping like flies in this disgusting scandal of not being attended to by the health services because of prejudice against gay people and all the rest of it. And then I'll give another example, which we discussed quite a lot in Insulate Britain and Just Stop Oil is, and again you can look this up on the internet, is the Sex Pistols in 1979, and there's this moment where there's this rather patronising, well-spoken BBC journalist, and he provokes them and puts them down. And I can't remember the exact details of how this ended up, but they ended up just swearing, just like 14-year-olds or something, and they were just saying fucking cunt, fuck cunt sort of stuff. And it caused this massive scandal because, the BBC didn't allow this. This was in the days when it was like live and they couldn't censor it. And of course, the rationalist, non-violence, Gandhian space is going to say, well, that's really inappropriate and you're causing, alienation and what have you. But how I would interpret it is what's going on there is not the words. What's going on there, the words are just a manifestation of a communication which is saying we're over being put down, patronised, being told we're idiots, and we're just going to go wild. Because what human nature does is an iron law of human nature is if people don't get recognition, if they don't get love in the classical sense, if they don't get attended to, then they become destructive. And the destruction is a form of creativity, which reflects the lack of recognition that they're receiving in the social space. So there's a certain therapeutic aspect to it. And the last example here, and I don't have the link to it, I can't remember, but you can look up on YouTube like examples of black guys being interviewed in the late 60s. And what you say, I'm straightening up when I say this because I just remember how they come across. And they're just coming across as we're absolutely certain of what we believe. And this situation is beyond fact. And we're going to change it. And you're not going to stand in our way. And we know what we're doing. And if you've got a problem, you can go and fuck yourself, right? It's like we are here and your days are over and we're over it. And it's just like, it doesn't really matter what they're saying. Some of it's quite incoherent from a university education point of view. That's neither here nor there. What the ambience is this society is changing and there's this new zeitgeist, right? We're having zero tolerance of all this racist bullshit, and all hell's going to break loose if we don't get our way because we're right and we know we're right and we're right. And it's like you just end up after 2 or 3 minutes going, yeah. I'm not listening to arguments. All I'm listening to is this. Now, I'm not, again, throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. What I'm saying is, obviously it can be overdone. And we've got this 8 out of 10 concept in action theory. We can have an 8 out of 10 concept when we're talking about authentic, aggressive communication. But the same can be said, like on the other side of the equation, a bit like what I said about the truth. Like in emotional communication, there's, in progressive circles, this thing called nonviolent communication. And when I was in those 20s, I actually found it very useful. And it generally rotates around this sentence, when you do this, I feel like this, and I would request you change your behaviour to this, right? And it's a nice formulation, and it's got a lot going for it. And at the same time, like, there's something sort of deeply problematic. And what's deeply problematic about it is that it's flat. What it's saying is, if you just say this in your communication, then it means this. But as we've established, you know, that's psychologically literate. When you're speaking words, but you also got the tone, the pitch and all the rest of it. And then you've got the general ambience, you know, when I'm moving my hands and all this sort of thing. And so you've got all this antennae going, is this guy bullshitting or is he authentic? And the problem with this theory, at least in how, you know, it's probably more sophisticated with the guy who made it up. So but it's become more reductive that you say this and it'll be fine, which in a certain sense is right. But the problem with it is, what happens if you really hate the guy? What happens if you really hate the guy you're talking to? And what usually gets sort of corrupted into is, when you do this, I feel like that is problematic. This, you know, great middle class university word, problematic. No, you don't find it problematic. You find it fucking crap, right? So why don't you say, well, when you do this, I find what you're doing fucking crap, and I want you to change. Now, that creates some authenticity in the communication. And the argument, of course, is that if you just do this flat version, this middle-class repressed version, then the person listening to you knows that you're just bullshitting them, and actually you don't like them at all. And it'd help a lot if you just told them and had it out. Okay, so underlying this sort of problem, and, you know, for the record, I'm not saying there's a final resolution to this. What I'm saying is we need to be more pluralistic in our interpretation of how communication actually works in a holistic sense. And one of the biggest misinterpretations is between what you might call expressiveness and really meaning it. So this is similar to a juxtaposition between what you might call working class speech and middle class speech, or non-university educated speech and university educated speech. Now, those are generalizations, okay? So I'm not saying it's, you know, that's a simplification, obviously. But to simplify somewhat, what a lot of working class speech is doing is just being expressive. So what that means is, let's say a working class person says, I fucking hate you. They're not actually saying they hate you. They're not saying they hate you in some middle class, thought about it for 10 days and that's your position for the next year. In this archetypal working class expressiveness mode, when they say, I hate you, they're just saying, I'm really pissed off with you at this moment, right? And 5 minutes later, they might be giving you a hug at something. You're going, yeah, sorry, you know, I've got a bit overexcited there, but, you know, I was just saying how I was feeling. Well, that's totally different to this university imposition of sort of the construction of hate speech, where someone's going, I hate you, and I hate you, and I'll always hate you, and I really hate you, and it's going to go on forever. That's a different kettle of fish, isn't it? That's like psychotic hate. That's totally different. So this gets confused all the time. And what I'm saying here is that in terms of getting attention, in terms of creating authenticity, in terms of bringing ordinary speech and ordinary sociability into the public sphere, what we have to do is empower and make space for non-university speech, working class people who are going to mess it up. But they're not, right? Because they're going to get this attention, and this authenticity is going to produce what you might call a more honest form of communication in the public sphere. So this, you know, this relates back to this reformist orientation and this revolutionary orientation, as we've discussed. All right, so I'm sort of half imagining some people are sort of vaguely panicking at this point and going, no, Roger, this is really bad. It's going to create all this, horrible confrontation, aggression in the public sphere. People are going to hate it. You're going to alienate people. So what I'd like to introduce at this moment is, what I'm saying up to this point in terms of communication and media and framing is, this is a move, right? It's a move. It's not the whole picture, right? In the same way as nonviolent confrontation is not the whole picture. When you're sitting in the road, that's only part of the picture. As we said over and over again, what nonviolence is disruption, confrontation, and dialogue and listening. The two things interact. They go, you do one and then you do the other and then you go back and do the other again. So there's this literature called tit for tat, right? Which is, and push and pull. This is another phrase, and it's there in various literatures. So tit for tat basically says, look, if you're going to be shitty in your interview, I'm going to be shitty to you. And at the end of the interview, I'm going to be nice to you and say, why don't you, the interviewer's going to say, oh, you never answer the questions. And you're going, well, I'm not answering questions because it's just entertainment. If you want me to answer the questions, then fine, let's do an hour interview where you give me at least 5 minutes to reply and you're not going to interrupt me every 30 seconds. So then you're putting down you're pivoting basically to a new form of communication, which is structured to enable deliberation. So the whole point here is the reason you're not deliberating and being rational is not because deliberation and rational doesn't have some intrinsic value. Obviously it does, right? What you're saying is if you're going to create a space which is all about entertainment and ridicule and wit, fine, I can play that game with you. If you want to play another game, if you want to play the game of deliberation and rational conversation, fine, let's do that. Let's have an hour and you make an agreement to give me 5 minutes to reply to your questions. And then you can develop obviously a nuanced argument and, give some stories and all the rest of it. So this is where we pivot to what you might call the long form deliberative space or the debate space. And I sort of did this with Aaron the other day on Nabora Media. He was pretending to be a popular sort of questioner and, he was interrupting me all the time. And there was lots of comments below the YouTube channel going, let the guy speak. Because what people wanted was a long form deliberative debate. In other words, here's a question, you've got 5 minutes of uninterrupted time to answer it. So I'm saying to Aaron, or I will be saying to Aaron, okay, let's do it again. And you shut up a bit and give me the chance to actually develop my arguments. And then I won't be so obtrusive. And maybe he'll do it and maybe he won't. And I've also done this with the Times newspaper. Times just write these ridiculously biased articles and I say, well, if you want me to do an interview, you're going to have to do a long form interview and give me a chance to actually develop my argument. Otherwise, I'm not playing score. They want to interview me to make some clicks out of me by distorting what I've got to say. I'm not playing that game. I'm going to play the game when you give me a 3-hour interview and we actually talk about something sensible like the future of conservatism. All right, so an example of the long form debate is again, you can see this on YouTube, a debate myself and Rupert Reed had at Cambridge University. Now, the great thing about debates, I'm not saying the debate format is necessarily the be-all, end-all of deliberation. There are problems with it, and it involves a certain amount of rhetoric and wit and all the rest of it. But the fundamental point of a debate, formally defined, is you have 15 minutes or 10 minutes to make an argument, and someone's not going to interrupt you after 30 seconds. So what myself and Rupert did is we did quite a lot of research, obviously, on the climate. We had our facts, we had our arguments, we had our stories. He was going to talk about, XXX, and I was going to talk about YYY. And we went into battle, and they put up against us, these popular, entertainer, witty people. But they couldn't get a grip on us because the format of the debate gave us plenty of time to formally produce all this evidence to say, those young Cambridge University students what's coming down the line is terrible and they have a massive responsibility to step up into a revolutionary mode. Well, Rupert didn't say that, obviously, but I did. And going into the debate, it was like evens on the subject, and coming out of the debate, I think it was 3 times the number of people agreed with us, voted for us rather than the other side. So you can see here how the tabloid paradigm can be designed out of the space, assuming you control how how that space is designed. And what's interesting here, of course, is the ideology of the right, the ideology of conservatism, at least in the UK, is all about free speech and all about debates, because they love to create this ambience that they're the realists, they're the people that follow the science, they're the tough business types, the world is the world, it's hard, we're going to have to dig up more oil because, bum, 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 bum. So there's a contradiction here, because in actuality, they're not interested in debate at all. So this opens up the move where you say to the Sun or the Daily Mail, you say, okay, so let's have a good old-fashioned British open debate about it. And you get an independent person that's chairing it, and you agree the rules, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is. And it's structured so that you can have your say. And again, so what the plan then is yes, you're going to give some detailed arguments about, why oil is a bad idea and all the rest of it. And because you've got this open debate and you're calm and they can't interrupt you, then you're going to win it. So that's, to emphasize then, that is me making the point. We're not against deliberation. We're not against rationalism. What we're saying is we're being smart about designing a communicative strategy on the basis of the terrain that we have to fight upon. Being smart about it. All right. So for the next 15, 20 minutes, I'm going to look at quite a different approach then, which is dealing with long-form conservative stroke right-wing media spaces. So notice this is long-form. So there's variations on the theme, but there's quite a lot of spaces on YouTube, on the internet, where these right-wing, often sort of libertarian type podcasts and video shows, they bring someone in, and to give them credit, they're going, look, we're going to have a good hour chat, maybe an hour and a half chat. And, we're going to develop argument and all this sort of stuff, because a lot of the right likes this idea of argument because they think they're the rationalists, and, maybe they are, maybe they're not. So before I get into the strategy about how to deal with this particular, space of communication, I want to make the point that one of the catastrophic strategic errors of the left and the progressive space over the last 30 years has been this purist notion that you don't talk to the opposition. Because if you talk to the opposition, there's this irrational idea that you're therefore in somehow agreeing with them and consolidating them. But you're not. What you're doing when you go into a right-wing space is you've got an opportunity to do 2 things. The first thing is you're creating connectivity through these routines I'm going to go through in a minute. And if you remember what nonviolence theory is about, is this 8 out of 10 thing, that the whole reason civil resistance works is because you're polarizing, but you're not over-polarizing. We've got this really clear differential. It's not, agree versus polarizing. It's polarizing versus over-polarizing. Over-polarizing being defined as a point at which people are not going to come back because they hate you so much. And this is the big downfall of, violent strategies or secrecy strategies. Polarizing is absolutely essential because you need to wind people up. So what you're doing when you're going into the right-wing space as part of a larger strategy is preventing overpolarization through the sociability of your simple presence at that moment in that space. So this was the Harley Milk strategy that we've talked about a few times. Harley Milk, this gay guy, went into the evangelical churches where these horrible, right-wing bigoted people were going to give him a really hard time and say insulting things, and he was just going to sit there and calmly and take it. But he wasn't taking it because he was being a twat, as it were. He was taking it because he was being smart, because he knew that by being calm, there was this jiu-jitsu communicative sort of process where the observers were going, what the hell? They're just bullying this basically okay guy. So it creates this backfiring effect. And it creates a connection, of course, with all these Christians in these big churches, that people are going to be walking up the church going, oh, I really want to hate this guy, but actually he was sort of okay. And that's the first element to prevent over polarization. The other reason it's a dumb move not to go on into these spaces is that this conservative case on the Deaf Project, is just completely full of contradiction. And it's a joy, basically, to sit there and go, just point this out. What you're saying is really interesting, but it doesn't really make sense, as I'll come on to explain. So what we're doing here is this is very much an extension of this paradigm of sociability. You're coming into a space and you're creating this non-verbal connection. You're creating this connectivity and recognition, all the rest of it. And you're doing this through the opposite of what the other strategy was. This is not a confrontation strategy. This is a listening strategy. And the whole point is it's not one or the other. It's do this and then do the other and then do this and then do the other. Push and pull. All right, so let's look at this in a little bit more detail. The paradigm to think about when you go into a right-wing space, and I often think this, this is what keeps me going, is you get up in the morning and think, the world is a bit like some madhouse and you're a psychotherapist, You get up each morning and you go to the psychiatric hospital and there's people in there who are mad, and because they're mad, then you don't get emotionally disturbed by it because your expectation is they're mad, without getting into what that definition is. But broadly speaking, you're expecting a whole load of crap. And because you're expecting it, you're okay about it. So similarly, like with a therapist, you've got someone coming in, they're standing, they're sitting opposite you. You already know they're going to come out with a whole load of stuff, which probably makes no sense, is politically incorrect, which is, undermines their self-esteem. And what your process of therapy is you're going to listen to it. And listening to it is the first step towards some sort of transformation. Not always, of course, but it's a fair bet. Okay, so when you're going into right-wing space, and I've done 3 or 4 interviews with these long-form conservative shows, and I'll probably go on some more of them. The first thing you're doing is you're listening. And by listening, I don't mean listening as a sort of move, right? You're listening because it's an ethical commitment. Because these guys have got a lot of good points. Dare I say it, right? All viewpoints have lots of good points. The problem is they're not all the good points, and they're missing a lot of stuff out. So you're listening to them and you're going, okay, so that's logic. You want to understand what the conservative logic is. Okay, saying that because of that. And then what you're doing is, as in therapy or in counselling, you're summarising it. So you're going, let's say the guy's called Joe. So you're saying, well, Joe, yeah, thanks for those comments. First of all, I just want to make sure I've understood what you're saying here. So what you're saying is the reason why there's immigrants is because of this, and the climate is no problem because of this, and people who go on the road are complete twats because of this. And I can see what you're saying here because, and then you start to really connect with them by understanding their underlying frame and their underlying values. So the reason you think this is because, you think that this country is important and we need to keep it, with one culture because that enables everyone to work together and have solidarity. And we don't want immigrants because it undermines everything that you believe in terms of stability and familiarity. And this is really important to you, blah, blah, blah. And then you're talking about the values. So your values are, a sense of place. Your family is important, your community. The community is where society should be based. People should be able to do what they like because it's important that individuals have this sense of freedom, blah, 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 right? And then you're going to say, so, I don't know if I've got that right. I don't know. I mean, maybe I haven't. I don't know whether I've got that right. And Joe's going to go, yeah, so, and he's going to get going again. He's not actually bothered. I've done this a few times. He doesn't really want you to answer his question. What he wants is to engage in the act of speech, to get all this off his chest. And off he goes again. And I've done this with conspiracy theorists, like in public meetings. They ask me a question and I go, yeah, well, that's a really interesting question. And the reason you're asking it is because you really feel angry about this and they love it. They love it. And then they're off again. And after about, 20 minutes, they're all calming down. So there's a pivot within the conversation, which is, first of all, you're getting their respect despite their best intentions because they can't help themselves because you're listening to them. In other words, like the conscious brain isn't that important. They're coming in wanting to hate you and thinking you're a twat, but they can't help themselves to stop in terms of their whole being, receiving a certain sense that, this is good, I'm being listened to, because we're all suckers to being listened to. If someone listens to you, you're going to love them within about 3 minutes. I mean, people just love it. So the next move is once you've got that, what you might call foundational attention, trust and respect. And by foundational, I don't mean, they're still going to say you're a twat, but underneath they think, yeah, maybe you're okay. Then you can start co-investigating the contradictions within their argument. So you might say, well, this is really important what you just said. And you use the word and there seems to be some problem here with this. I don't know, have you thought about that? So you've asked their question, using their name, by the way, saying, oh, Joe, Or you can use the third person where you're going, well, I really see what you're saying, Joe. And some people might say, XXX. I don't know how you might respond to that. So you're not doing this ego confrontation where it's like, I think this, you think this, I think this and you're wrong. It's more like you're saying this, but other people out there are saying that. And because then the guy's thinking about people out there, which is a key design feature of constructive communication. So he's not getting angry with you, he's getting angry with people out there or that particular position. So I'm not going to talk about content. There's a bunch of things about the conservative position which is problematic, but you're probably aware, and if you're not aware, this is the central contradiction of the conservative tradition is they're supporting capitalism, fantastic, free enterprise, getting richer, more prosperity, blah, blah, blah. And they're conservatives and they don't want things to change. Well, the whole essence of capitalism, as we know, is creative destruction or destructive destruction. And so what's happening to family life? What's happening to the community? What's happening to, the defending of the state when you've got the climate crisis, when you've got social breakdown, when you've got extreme inequality, when you've got globalization, when you've got corporate corruption? And what you can bring out, of course, is this genuine objective problem. There's problems with the left-wing position as well, right? But the purpose here is not to come to some intellectual agreement. The purpose is to create a space of culture, a space of recognition and respect. And at the end of it, the audience is going to go, well, I still hate him, but, he actually brought up some good points there. Or I still hate him, but actually he's an okay guy, and I was actually quite cheerful, because I tend to be quite cheerful with these right-wing people, because what they expect you to be is some sort of puritanical, joy-killing Calvinist. So it's quite good to be quite light and breezy with them, in so much as you're light and breezy, and I'm quite a light and breezy person a lot of the time, dare I say it. So that's fine with me. So in other words, it's the holistic interpretation of the communication, which is dissolving and confusing the position and the self-confidence of the audience, and of course the person that's having the argument with you. So a little example on this, I went onto this show, and there's this guy from Kent, and also working class ambiance sort of guy, and he had really clear things he was unhappy with in society, and he obviously wanted to promote me as some university educated twat sort of thing that doesn't know how real life works, which isn't exactly true, in so much as I was a farmer for 20 years. But leaving that aside, I use this approach. But the interesting thing at the end of it was he actually used my name. He said, Roger, blah, 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 blah. And it doesn't matter what the blah, blah, blah was. The fact of the matter is he used my first name. And what that meant was he was basically mates with me. If I'd been more confident, I'd say, you know what, why don't I come down to Kent and we go to the pub and have a chat? And he probably would have said yes, because people can't help themselves to enter into this sociability orientation when you have the social design that encourages sociability. And sociability, as we've discussed many times, is this foundational concept of what this revolutionary transformation needs to be if it's not going to regress into authoritarian sort of crap. All right, so let me just give you two quick examples here before I finish. So one of them is I went to this wedding, and I was late. So I had to get a taxi. I don't usually get taxis, by the way, but I got a taxi. Well, it was interesting because I was talking to this taxi driver, and he said to me, it was a 5-minute conversation, right? And he said, what do you do? And I said, well, I do campaigning, which is usually my way of getting out of a difficult conversation. Anyway, he was quite pushy and said, look, I do climate change stuff here, climate crisis. And he said, oh, well, it's all sunspots. And he was just regurgitating all this stuff he'd heard on social media. And I was going, yeah, sunspots are really important. No, I wasn't saying that's a really crappy idea. I was saying, yeah, there are sunspots, and the Earth, temperatures gets hotter. And at the same time, if you put carbon into the atmosphere, that raises the temperature a lot as well. Blah, blah, blah. And I was sort of, having this chat, and he was going on about his diesel vehicle, and and stuff. Anyway, when I got out of the car, he just leaned over to me and he said, well, you know what? If I could afford an electric car, I'd buy one tomorrow, right? So what that said to me was the reason why he's against all this green crap is it's all cultural stuff. It's all because he's alienated from the culture of activists. He is just as keen as everyone else is to get on with this job of decarbonising the economy. What's preventing him is the lack of sociability in the public sphere. And obviously, in this case, 3 or 4 minute conversation, and basically we're mates. He more or less agrees with what I say. I'm agreeing with him. It's not a big contradictory situation. This happens like a billion times every day, right? People come into confrontation and they use sociability techniques of listening to re-establish connectivity and prevent over polarization. So the other example is with fascists. So I think I mentioned this before, I can't remember again, but I'll say it again because it's a great example, which is this research that says, if you're a fascist, a self-described fascist, the single biggest determinant factor of becoming not a fascist, as it were, leaving the movement, is whether a young man gets a girlfriend. And we could talk about this for quite a long time, but you can see what's going on here, which is it's not the actual arguments themselves that are important to this guy who's a fascist. As a general rule, of course, there's fascists who are psychotic, right? But most fascists, for the sake of argument, they're basically looking for a meaning system in a world that's alienating, to simplify somewhat. By getting a girlfriend, they're less alienated, and they're probably more emotionally supported, and they feel less sort of self-destructive or outwardly destructive and all the rest of it. So this is like, this is all connects in with this sociability orientation. And what it contradicts or counteracts is this left-wing negativity and this paranoid fear of social media. No one's... Yeah, got 2 minutes. I'm trying to keep this to 40 minutes. Anyway, what I want to say is that I've got a good friend, and he's always saying to me, well, Roger, there's Cambridge Analytica, and just this big right-wing billionaire social media thing, and it's tearing society apart, and people hating each other, and it's all reductive communication. And I'm going like, yeah, obviously. It's a really big problem. And at the same time, it can be dissolved in 3 minutes. It can be all that very superficial socialization gets trumped by the miracle of a 3-minute conversation where you're going, yeah, I agree with you, mate. And at the same time, there's this, what do you think? And it's like, oh, yeah, we're mates now, right? And what we're doing across all this series is micro-designing those 3 minutes, whether it's on the street, whether it's in the court, whether it's talking to a taxi driver. Because this is what this revolution, this is the foundation of it, right? We're going to talk about all the high politics in a bit, but this is like the foundation of what this revolution in human society needs to involve. Okay, so that's it. All it will do. I mean, a lot of what I've said is quite fast, and we need to look at it again in various different ways. But I'm hoping that it's given you a taste of where we're up to on all this. So to summarise, we're using a confrontation approach, and then we're using a listening approach. We're using a push and pull approach. We're using tit and tat sort of approach. Like, if you're going to be nasty, I'll be nasty. If you're going to be nice, I'm going to be nice, right? I'll be nice, and if you're nasty, then I'll be nasty, and you'll be nasty, right? You'll get the people get the idea. And the last thing I'll say is, obviously, what I've focused on in these last 2 talks is the space of the interview, right? The space of the YouTube 1 hour thing, the 2 minute thing. Obviously, in terms of media and communication and framing, this is part of a wider subject. For instance, like what you might call cultural production, creating comedy shows, creating music, culture. All of this has to be designed with the same sort of framing and new ideological orientation, and we'll be looking at that in future talks, don't worry. All right, thanks so much. 1 minute over. Thanks, bye.